Zareth sat quietly on the cold metal bench, her long fingers folded tightly in her lap. The walls around her were white, smooth, and silent like every other lab she had known. She wasn't nervous, not exactly. She had been bred for one purpose only, to reproduce. There was no room for fear in that task. Everything was scheduled, tested, and recorded. Emotions were seen as defects. So when the door opened with a soft hiss, she stood immediately, prepared to do what was expected, to researchers in pale. Blue coats stepped in, one holding a small device, subject Z143. One said, not looking at her face, "You've been selected for a unique pairing." With a human, Zareth blinked slowly, unsure she heard correctly. A human. They were not part of the breeding program. They were unpredictable, emotional, dangerous. Still, she nodded, as she was trained to do, and followed them through the corridor. The door at the end opened into a soft-lit chamber, surprisingly warm. Inside stood a human Melitol, tan-skinned, short brown hair, relaxed posture. He turned when she entered and smiled. No alien in her life had ever smiled at her before. Zareth felt her breath catch in her throat, something unfamiliar rising inside her chest. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Ethan." Zareth stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Was this part of the procedure? Was she supposed to acknowledge him as a partner, or remain silent as usual? Her training hadn't covered this. He tilted his head, watching her carefully. "You don't have to be afraid, you know." Afraid? No, she wasn't. Afraid, but she didn't understand either. The human extended a hand, not forcefully, just ... Waiting, Zareth looked at it like it was a tool she didn't know how to use. Still, slowly, she placed her palm against his. Warm, rough, alive, not like the cold scans or sterile gloves of the lab. This felt real. The researchers behind the glass took notes, but Zareth barely noticed. Her focus was on the strange sensation passing from his skin into hers. Connection, not for function, not for testing, just contact. She pulled her hand back suddenly. Confused by her own reaction, Ethan didn't seem upset. Instead, he walked to the table and gestured. "Wanna sit?" Zareth sat stiffly, her mind racing. Humans were said to be driven by emotions. That they formed bonds and attachments. Things her kind had long erased from their biology. "Do you know why they paired us?" he asked, looking at her softly. Zareth nodded once. "Breeding compatibility," he chuckled, and the sound made her chest tighten again. "Sure," he said, "but I think they're also trying to see how we handle ... Closeness. Zareth's eyes narrowed. Closeness. "You'll see," he said with a wink, and for some reason her face warmed. Was that embarrassment? The first day passed without physical procedures. Ethan spoke more than any partner she had ever been assigned. He asked questions about her life, her favorite color. If she ever dreamed, Zareth had never been asked such things. She didn't know how to answer, but she listened to his stories about Earth, about the ocean, about music, about dancing. Why would someone move their body just to feel good? Her kind danced only when commanded, as ritual. Or tradition, but pleasure. That night, she lay on her assigned bed in the observation chamber. Staring at the ceiling, for the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about her next test, next result, next scan. She was thinking about him. The way his eyes had looked into hers, not cold, not scanning, but seeing. As if he was trying to understand, not measure her. Zareth touched her palm where their hands had met. She closed her eyes, unsure what was happening inside her. Was this what the elders feared about humans? That they made you feel? In the hallway. Outside, one researcher whispered to another. "The human subject is deviating from the expected pattern." "Yes," the other replied, "and so is Z143. Should we intervene?" "No, not yet." They didn't know that inside Zareth had just whispered to herself for the first time in years. Not a command, not a number, not a duty, just one word. Quietly, Ethan * Zareth sat in the corner of the shared room, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The lights were dimmed and silence filled the air. But her mind was not calm. She could still feel it the way Ethan's hand had touched hers the day before. It wasn't rough or demanding, like she had always expected it was. Soft, warm, and patient. That small touch had shaken something deep inside her. Something her training had never prepared her for. The aliens had taught her to submit, not to feel. Touch had always been part of procedure, nothing more, but this. This was different, and it scared her across the room. Ethan leaned back on the small bed they'd given him. He had been talking again, sharing stories from Earth about summer rain, beaches, his mother's cooking. Zareth didn't speak much, but she listened. His voice was like a rhythm, unfamiliar yet comforting. She wondered how a species could speak with so much emotion. Her kind spoke in facts, numbers, orders. But Ethan's words painted pictures, and something inside her longed to step into. Those images, he noticed her silence and paused. Did I say too much? Zareth looked at him, confused. No, she said softly. I don't want you to stop, he smiled. That same smile that had disarmed her on day one, her heart skipped. Again, and she hated that she didn't understand why. Can I ask you something? He said, sitting up. She nodded slowly, unsure what was coming next. Do you even like being touched? He asked, gently. Or does it make you uncomfortable? Zareth blinked, her mouth slightly open. I don't know, she whispered. No one's ever asked me that before. Ethan frowned, his eyes darkening. That's not right. She tilted her head. Why? Because, he said, your body is yours, not theirs. Zareth stared. As if he had just spoken a forbidden word, that idea, ownership of her own body, wasn't part of her world. Not in the labs, not in the training halls, not in the genetic temples she had been taught to offer her body when told. But Ethan didn't demand, he asked. That night, while the cameras were turned away for system reset, Ethan stood close to her. Just your hand, he said, reaching out slowly. I won't force anything. Zareth looked at his fingers. Trembling slightly, she reached out, placing her hand in his once again. The warmth spread through her again like before, but this time it didn't scare her. It made her feel something new, something like peace. Their fingers slowly intertwined. Zareth looked up, and their eyes met green and silver, human and alien. Two different worlds holding one shared moment. Her breath slowed, her chest light, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a lab tool. She felt alive. Suddenly, a loud beep rang through the room, and the door opened. A senior researcher stepped in. His eyes cold, sharp. Watching them, Zareth pulled her hand back instantly, her heart racing. Ethan stood between her and the researcher, not moving. What are you doing? The researcher barked, stepping forward. Ethan didn't back down. We were just talking. Zareth remained silent, her hands still tingling where his fingers had been. You were not authorized to initiate. Physical bonding, the researcher hissed. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean touching hands? That's bonding. In her case, yes. The alien replied sharply. Her emotional centers are developing too quickly. Zareth looked down, ashamed. Though she didn't understand why, the researcher pointed at her. You will return to reconditioning tomorrow. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. She hasn't done anything wrong. You don't decide that, human, the alien snapped. You are the experiment, not the leader. As the door closed and the researcher left, Ethan turned to Zareth, his eyes full of anger and concern. I won't let them break you. He said softly. Zereth looked at him, her voice trembling. But I don't know who I'm becoming. You're becoming free, he said, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear, and though she knew they were being watched, again, she didn't flinch. She let him touch her not out of duty, not out of fear, but because, deep inside, she wanted it. Later, as she lay in her bed, she whispered the word again, quietly, Ethan. But this time, it wasn't just his name. It was hope, wrapped in 5 letters. Zereth stood by the tall window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass. Outside, the stars moved slowly in the black sky. Inside, her heart felt louder than it ever had before. She didn't understand this new feeling that kept growing inside her. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pain, it was something soft, something warm and strange. A flutter in her chest, a lightness behind her ribs. She had no word for it, not in her language. Not in her training. Ethan walked into the room, holding 2 steaming cups in his hands. Try this, he said with a smile, handing one to her. She looked down at the cup, suspicious. What is it? Hot chocolate, he grinned. It's sweet, it's warm. And it makes people happy, Zereth raised an eyebrow. Is that its purpose? Ethan sat down on the floor beside the window, his back against the wall. No, he said. That's its pleasure. She looked at him, puzzled. Pleasure. He nodded. Something that makes you feel good, just because it does. Zereth sat slowly beside him, holding the cup close but not drinking yet. Why would anyone make something just to feel good? Why not? He replied, We're not machines, Zereth. We're alive. She looked away, her voice quiet. My people don't believe in that. Everything we do must have function. Ethan chuckled softly. Then, I guess I'm here too. Mess everything up. She finally took a sip, and her eyes widened. The sweetness hit her tongue, followed by the warmth that spread down her throat. Her fingers tightened around the cup. And for a brief second, she smiled. It vanished quickly. But Ethan saw it. There it is, he said. That's pleasure. Zereth looked at the cup, then at him. It's strange, but not bad, Ethan said, watching her carefully. No, she whispered. Not bad at all. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Zereth's mind was spinning. Pleasure, warmth, sweetness, things she had never been allowed to feel before. Not when she was raised in the birthing stations, not during the clinical pairings, not when her body was tested, injected, and recorded again and again. Now, suddenly, a human was showing her the meaning of feeling. And it terrified her. Ethan, she said softly. Why are you so kind to me? He glanced at her, surprised by the question. Because you deserve it, but I'm not like you, she said, her voice shaky. I'm a product, not a person. Who told you that? The elders, the handlers, the program, they led, he said, firmly. You feel, you think. You choose, that makes you a person. Zereth lowered her eyes, tears threatening to fall. Tears, another thing she had been punished for showing. Ethan noticed and gently placed a hand on hers. She didn't pull away this time. I don't know what's happening to me, she said, her voice trembling. You're becoming more than what they designed, Ethan whispered. You're discovering joy. The next morning, Zereth was taken for medical scans. Her body was responding in ways the scientists didn't understand. Her neural pathways were more active, her hormone levels had shifted. They whispered behind their masks, debating the results, but they all agreed on one thing: Ethan was affecting her beyond protocol. They considered separating them, reprogramming her, but a senior observer said, let it continue, the data is too valuable. Later, when she returned to the room, she was quiet, thoughtful. Ethan looked at her with concern. Bad scan? Yes. She shook her head. No, just strange results. Then she looked at him, really looked, and asked, Why do you laugh, Ethan? He blinked. caught off guard, because it feels good. That's pleasure too. Exactly, he said, then added, want to try? Stood up and made a silly face, puffing his cheeks and crossing his eyes. Zeroth stared at him, confused. Then he did a slow, clumsy dance. Twirling and tripping over his own feet, she gasped not out of fear, but from surprise, a soft sound escaped her lips, a short, sudden giggle. Her hand flew to her mouth in shock. What was that? Ethan smiled wide. That was laughter. Zeroth began to giggle again, a little louder this time. Her shoulders relaxed. Her body shook with a new kind of energy. It wasn't control, it wasn't programming, it was pure, unfiltered joy. When she finally stopped, her eyes were shining. I've never laughed before, she said, breathless. Well? Ethan grinned. Now you have. Zeroth looked at him with something new in her eyes. Trust, curiosity, even affection, and deep inside her, something shifted again. She didn't just want to survive the program anymore. She wanted to. Live ***. Zeroth's hands trembled as she pressed the flat stone to her chest. It wasn't special, not in the way scientists would measure. But Ethan had given it to her during their walk in the greenhouse chamber. He said humans used to skip such stones across lakes for fun. To her, it felt like a symbol of something soft, something free, something not controlled by charts or rules. She hid it inside her bed panel, afraid they'd take it away if they knew. The lab grew colder that week. Not in temperature, but in silence. The observers stopped speaking to her. Even during scans, she was kept from Ethan for 2 days straight. No reason given. Zeroth paced her room like a caged animal. She didn't understand what was happening. All she knew was that the one being who made her feel human was gone, and it hurt more than she expected when the door finally opened on the 3rd day. She didn't wait. She ran into the corridor, ignoring protocol, ignoring fear, her instincts. Driving her forward, she followed the scent of warmth and food. Remembering Ethan's favorite place, the lower-level break room, she burst through the sliding doors, her breath sharp. And there he was, Ethan seating at a metal table. Alone, his face pale and tired. He looked up as she entered, his eyes wide, then soft. Zeroth. She rushed toward him, stopping just short of his arms. Where were you? She demanded, her voice cracking. They isolated me, he said, bitterly. Said I was causing interference. She sat down hard, trembling. They're afraid of you. They're afraid of us, Ethan corrected, because we're not following their design anymore. Zeroth leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was broken. You're not broken, Ethan said. You're finally healing. A loud alarm sounded from the hallway outside. Security. Drones were already tracking her movement. We need to go, Ethan said suddenly, standing up. Now? But where? She asked, confused. He pointed to a small maintenance door at the back of the room. Barely visible, I've seen engineers go through their leads to the old tunnels. Zeroth didn't hesitate. She followed him, her heart pounding. They slipped inside the dark tunnel, the door sealing behind them with a soft hiss. Dust and old machinery filled the narrow space. It was cramped and quiet, no sensors, no cameras, just the sound of their breathing. They moved slowly, guided only by the pale glow of emergency lights. After a few turns, they reached an old service hub. Unused and forgotten. Here in the silence, Ethan turned to her. I wasn't going to leave without you, he said. Voice steady. Zeroth looked at him, tears in her eyes. They said you were dangerous. Ethan chuckled softly. To their system. Maybe. She stepped closer, inches from him, but not to me. For a moment, they stood there, faces lit by the dim yellow light. Zeroth lifted her hand and touched his cheek. Slowly, this time, there was no command, no permission asked. It was her choice. Ethan leaned into her touch. Closing his eyes, she whispered, I'm afraid I am too, he said gently, but I'm more afraid of never feeling again. Then their lips met quietly, softly, like two stars brushing. In the dark, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't planned, it was simply. Right when they pulled apart, Xerath's eyes shimmered with something new. I don't understand what's happening to me, she said, but I don't want it to stop. It's called freedom, Ethan whispered, holding her hands tightly. And once you taste it, you never forget. Suddenly, a red glow filled the edges of the hallway. Security was sweeping the lower tunnels. Voices calling out warnings. Xerath turned to run, but Ethan stopped her. This way, he said. Revealing a hidden hatch beneath the floor grating, they climbed down quickly, closing the panel above them, plunging into darkness once again. For hours, they hid beneath the heart of the facility. Huddled close for warmth, whispering stories. Instead of orders, Xerath shared memories she thought she had forgotten of being young, of drawing in sand, of looking at the stars. Ethan listened to every word, never judging, never rushing her. He held her hand again, and this time she didn't let go. Above them, the lab systems were scanning, searching, analyzing. But what the scientists couldn't understand, they couldn't control, and what Xerath and Ethan had found down in the tunnels was something no scanner could measure, something far more powerful than data. Connection. The stars above the horizon looked different from outside the lab walls. Xerath stood at the edge of a cliff, wind brushing through her silver hair. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't breathing for someone else, not for a scan, not for a test. This breath was hers, and hers alone. Behind her, Ethan was checking a small handheld device, trying to locate a safe zone. They had escaped the facility 2 days ago through old mining shafts and forgotten tunnels. Since then, they've been moving under darkness, hiding during the day. Xerath's body ached. Her feet were raw, but she didn't complain. Every step she took was one away from her past, and closer to something new they'll be looking for. Us by now, Ethan said, lowering the device. They'll never stop. Xerath replied, without fear. You sure you want to keep running? He asked, stepping beside her. She looked at him, then at the stars again. I'm not running, she whispered. I'm choosing. They traveled through rocky forests, across streams, and into abandoned outposts. At one point, a supply drone flew overhead, scanning the terrain. Xerath ducked behind Ethan. Her heart racing, he held her close, shielding her with his body. When the drone passed, she looked up at him, breathless. Why did you do that? She asked. Because I'd rather them take me than you. He replied without hesitation. Her eyes burned with something unexplainable, something too big for words. It felt like fire, but safe. By the 5th night, they found shelter in a remote human-alien border village, a small community that had long rejected the main councils. Hybrids and former lab escapees lived there, hidden and protected. A tall woman with rough hands and golden eyes led them inside a dome-shaped hut. You're not the first, she told them, but you might be the most important. Inside, Xerath sat by a glowing heat lamp, staring at the quiet children playing in the corner. They were laughing, throwing colorful orbs at each other. One had scales, another had antennae, but they laughed the same. She whispered, "They're so alive." Ethan handed her a blanket and sat beside her. That's because no one here tells them not to be. In the following days, Xerath learned how to cook with her hands, not machines. She planted soil with alien seeds that would grow into bright red fruit. She laughed when one splashed her face with juice. The villagers treated her like one of their own, not as a number, not as a subject, but as a person, and Ethan was always nearby, watching with quiet joy as she discovered herself one evening as they sat alone by a flickering fire. Xerath turned to him. "I didn't know life could feel like this." Ethan smiled. Neither did I until I met you. She leaned into him slowly, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm scared it'll be taken away, she whispered. Then we fight to protect it, he replied, placing a kiss on her forehead. But peace doesn't last long when you're hunted. The council had issued a quiet alert in order to retrieve both fugitives. Bounty units, faster than drones, were dispatched silently, and one of them had found a trail. The village elder called an emergency meeting in the main circle. Everyone sat in silence as she explained. We can hide you, the elder said. Or we can send you to the old passageway beneath the cliffs. It leads to the free zones. Xerath looked around the circle. These people had risked everything for her. I won't bring destruction to your home, she said firmly. Ethan stood beside her. Then we'll go together. As the villagers prepared their exit, one small child tugged on Xerath's hand. Will you come back? The girl asked, her eyes wide and trusting. Xerath knelt down, touched her forehead gently, and whispered, when I'm free, I'll come dance with you. The girl smiled and ran back into the crowd. That night, Xerath and Ethan stood at the entrance to the old passage. He looked at her, still not too late to turn back. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. This, she said, is forward. They stepped into the tunnel, surrounded by darkness and silence. But their fingers were tightly locked, and their hearts beat in rhythm. Above them, the world searched. Below them, two fugitives of emotion walked towards something no system could control. Freedom lit by love. The cave tunnel opened into a hidden valley surrounded by tall cliffs and glowing trees. It was untouched by scanners, unmapped by any official system. Xerath stepped forward carefully, her eyes wide with awe. The air here felt different, alive, warm, humming with energy. Ethan followed close behind, carrying the small bag of supplies the village had given them. This place wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a beginning. They made camp near a small river, its water shimmering with blue light. Xerath sat beside the stream, dipping her hands in slowly. The cool water made her gasp and laugh, a sound that still felt new on her lips. Ethan watched her quietly, his heart full, not with desire, not with duty, but something deeper. He was watching someone discover what it meant to live. Later that night, they lay beside each other on a bed of leaves and soft cloth. Above them, stars blinked through the canopy. Xerath turned toward Ethan, her voice soft. Do you still see me as a test subject? He looked into her silver eyes. Never. Then what am I to you? She whispered. He smiled gently. You're a miracle. She blinked slowly, unsure how to respond. She wasn't built for compliments or kindness or closeness, but in Ethan's presence, she was learning to receive not just orders, but care. She reached for his hand, sliding her fingers between his. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't assigned. It was her choice. In the days that followed, Xerath explored her own body, not through the lens of biology or expectation. A curiosity. She touched her skin and didn't feel shame. She studied her reflection in the river, not with judgment, but wonder. Ethan never interrupted, never rushed, never told her what to feel. Instead, he created space for her to feel it safely. One morning, she stood beneath a waterfall, letting the water cascade over her bare shoulders. Ethan watched from a distance, silent, respectful. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She walked to him with confidence, droplets clinging to her skin like stars. I used to fear my own body, she said. Now, I think it's beautiful. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, not from desire, but from admiration. You are, he whispered. You always were. She stepped closer, placing her palm on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. This isn't about mating, she said softly. It's about connection. He nodded, not saying a word, just holding her hand against his heart. That night, they lay beneath a sheet of soft plant fiber. Their bodies close, but unhurried. Zirith pressed her forehead to his. "Can pleasure be sacred?" "Yes," Ethan said, "especially when it's given freely." She smiled gently. "Then I want to give it with no fear, no duty, no pressure." Their lips met again, not out of instinct, but out of mutual understanding. Every movement was slow, every touch full of care, not for reproduction, not for performance, but for love. Hours passed like seconds. And by morning, the valley felt changed. Zirith lay beside Ethan, her head on his chest, her heart calm. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't calculating her worth. She was whole. They spent the next few days mapping the area, growing food, building a shelter. It wasn't perfect. Storms came. Wild creatures howled. Hunger visited, but it was real. Zirith laughed more, danced without music, and sometimes just stared at the sky. One evening, she sat beside the fire, her hands glowing in the flame's reflection. "I never thought I'd want to live past 20, she admitted. "Now, I want years. Decades, maybe even children." Ethan leaned back, smiling. "And when they ask how it all started?" Zirith chuckled. "I'll tell them I met a strange human who refused to treat me like property." They both laughed, letting the sound echo through the valley. But beneath the laughter, there was truth. Zirith had crossed a line no lab could erase. She had discovered herself, not what she was made for, but who she truly was. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of her humming. He sat up and found her painting symbols on the rock wall with crushed berries and leaf ink. "What are those?" he asked, stretching. She looked back at him, smiling. "Our story." He stood beside her, watching the shapes, the lines, the stars she had drawn. He placed his hand over hers and whispered, "You've created more than art, Zirith." She turned toward him and kissed his cheek. "No," she said. "We created freedom." The sky over the valley burned golden as the twin suns began to rise. Zirith stood at the edge of the cliff, a soft breeze lifting her hair. She held one hand over her belly, feeling the quiet rhythm within. Not a signal, not a scan, but life. Real growing life behind her. Ethan stepped out of their small shelter, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He smiled when he saw her, walking over with slow steps. "You've been up a while," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," Zirith whispered. "Something in me feels ready." Ethan kissed the side of her head gently. "You're not the same person I met in that lab." She looked at him, silver eyes glowing in the light. "Neither are you." The peace in their hidden world didn't last unnoticed. One day, a small shuttle descended into the valley, marked with a white symbol, half human, half alien. Zirith stepped forward, tense but curious. A woman exited the ship, her voice calm and steady. "We've come in peace. We represent the Integration Council." Ethan and Zirith exchanged looks, unsure if it was a trap or a chance. But the woman stepped forward and knelt before Zirith. "Your story has changed everything," she said. "Across the galaxy, others are waking up, questioning, remembering how to feel." Zirith's hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of truth. They had been the beginning of something bigger than themselves. Ethan took her hand, steady as always. "Do they want us to come back?" He asked, voice firm. The woman shook her head. "No, not as subjects, not as fugitives, but as voices." Zirith blinked. "Voices. We want you to speak to the worlds," the woman said. "Tell them what it means to love freely." The next week was a blur. They were flown to peaceful colonies where people gathered in thousands to hear them. Zirith stood before crowds once, afraid to even speak her own name. Now she told her story with strength and fire. She told them how her body was once a tool, her life a system, her soul buried beneath silence, and how a human's touch brought her back to life. Ethan stood beside her every time, never in front, never overshadowing. He simply held space for her voice. Together, they became symbols, not of rebellion, but of renewal, not just human and alien, but partners, creators, healers. Months passed. And Xerath's belly grew. They settled in a new home, half open to the stars. Half built into the hills, visitors came, not to test, but to learn. Young ones asked questions like, "What does love feel like?" Xerath always smiled and answered, "It feels like waking up for the first time over and over again." One quiet evening, as they lay beside each other beneath the stars, Xerath whispered, "Do you think our child will be like us?" Ethan smiled. "If they're lucky." She chuckled softly. "What if they're scared to feel?" "Then we'll teach them," he said, "just like we taught each other." The wind brushed through the valley trees, carrying with it the echoes of a world that was beginning to heal. No longer ruled by cold control or lifeless order, but by voices, hands, hearts that had learned to trust again. Xerath stood beneath the moonlight that night and placed her hand on her heart. She remembered the first time she spoke Ethan's name, the first time she laughed, the first time she felt beautiful. And now, with life growing inside her, she felt something else, peace. As Ethan walked up behind her, she turned and smiled. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't put us in that lab together?" Ethan thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Because the universe was always going to find a way to bring us together. And in that moment, with stars above and life within, they didn't feel like a mistake or an experiment. They felt like the future. A new beginning born, not of command or design, but of one simple truth, that love, when chosen, changes everything."